Elena stood by the kitchen sink, the distant sound of rain tapping against the window like fingers too shy to knock. The house was quiet, except for the humming fridge and the occasional rustle of pages as Sophia flipped through her bedtime story in the living room. Elena had just returned from another exhausting night shift at the hospital. Her feet ached, her back burned, and the smell of antiseptic still clung to her skin. Yet none of that mattered. She was home. Home meant safety. Home meant James. Or so she thought. She poured herself a glass of water, glancing at the clock on the wall. 7:23 p.m. James was late again. He had promised to be back early to help with dinner, to at least say goodnight to Sophia, but promises were slippery things with him lately, words that evaporated as soon as they were spoken. Moments later, the front door creaked open. Elena looked up, smiling out of habit. James stepped in, his coat soaked, tie loose, and a sheepish look painted over his handsome features. He kissed her cheek quickly, too quickly, and headed toward the bedroom without removing his shoes. Something was off. It had been off for weeks, but Elena, as always, told herself not to make a fuss. She followed him silently, noticing how he fumbled with his shirt buttons as if trying to rush the end of something. She reached for his coat to hang it, just like she always did. That's when she saw it. Lipstick, bright coral, smudged along the inside collar of his white shirt, not the faded red she occasionally wore, not even the soft pink she had gifted herself last Christmas. This was a stranger's color, a loud one. Her hand froze. Time did too. "James?" she asked, her voice even, almost too soft. The kind of soft that carries danger. He turned, his eyes flicking from her face to the shirt in her hands, then back again. For a moment, neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. "Oh, that must have been from the patient's wife," he said with a chuckle too forced, reaching for the shirt. "I hugged her earlier today. She was crying. Must have gotten on me." Elena said nothing, just looked at him. She had spent 8 years with this man. She knew his lies. Knew the way his left eyebrow twitched when he was uncomfortable. Knew the way his fingers curled when he was hiding something. But more than that, she knew herself, and she knew what she had given up for this marriage. Her dreams of opening her own flower shop. Her youth spent wiping vomit and tears from strangers' cheeks while James chased a startup that never quite launched. Her savings, her sleep, her strength. It had all been poured into this house, into this family. And now it was unraveling, right here, in the faint orange light of their bedroom. That night, after Sophia had gone to bed, Elena sat alone in the kitchen. The rain hadn't stopped. It was heavier now, like it understood the weight in her chest. She stared at the lipstick-stained shirt on the table in front of her. She didn't cry. Not yet. Her tears weren't ready, but something inside her had shifted. Not shattered, not broken, just moved. Like a foundation that had started to crack quietly. She didn't wake James when she went to the spare room to sleep alone. She didn't speak of it the next morning either. She packed Sophia's lunch, kissed her forehead, and smiled like a woman who had never tasted betrayal. But behind her eyes, something had begun. A war she wouldn't declare out loud. A war she would fight with silence, with memory, with time. She wasn't going to scream. She wasn't going to beg. But the woman James had taken for granted was no longer asleep. She was watching. And soon, she would rise. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 2? The next morning, the sky was a dull gray, mirroring the weight in Elena's chest. She moved through the house like a ghost in her own life, making breakfast, brushing Sophia's hair, packing her school bag. James had already left before dawn, claiming a sudden meeting in London. She didn't ask where. She didn't care. But her silence wasn't surrender. It was calculation. That evening, after putting Sophia to bed, she waited, her hands folded on the kitchen table, the same spot they used to share late-night tea when they were still lovers, still partners. James came home smelling like aftershave and someone else's perfume. He threw his keys into the bowl by the door without looking at her. "Can we talk?" Elena asked quietly. James sighed, tossed his jacket over a chair, and poured himself a drink. Whiskey, 2 fingers, no ice. "If it's about the shirt, I told you already," he said, not meeting her eyes. Elena leaned forward, her voice calm but deliberate. "It wasn't just the shirt. It's the distance, the silence, the lies you tell without flinching. I know you're seeing someone, James, I know." He took a sip, then smirked. "You always think you know everything, don't you? Always playing detective while working double shifts and coming home too tired to even kiss me goodnight? Maybe if you'd been more present, less obsessed with holding everything together, I wouldn't have looked elsewhere." The words didn't slap her. They carved her slowly. "So, this is my fault?" she asked, voice trembling now. James turned to her, his eyes cold. "You've been more married to your hospital than to me. You think I didn't notice? How many times have I gone to bed alone? How many dinners have I eaten cold or not at all?" Elena laughed, bitter and quiet. "You mean the dinners I came home and cooked after 12-hour shifts? The meals I made while you sat watching stocks that never moved? The life I carried when you couldn't even lift your own weight?" He slammed the glass down. "You're impossible. You think being a martyr makes you holy? It just makes you boring." Silence. She stood, her chest rising and falling. "Then why didn't you leave sooner?" James stared at her. "Because I was waiting for you to stop pretending you were better than me." That night, he didn't sleep at home. He didn't call. He didn't text. The next morning, his side of the closet was half empty. On the 3rd day, just as Elena was brushing Sophia's hair for school, James returned, dressed in a fresh suit, clean-shaven, and carrying a manila envelope. He waited in the kitchen while Elena poured milk into Sophia's cereal. The child looked up at him, puzzled. "Daddy?" He smiled. "Morning, princess." But his eyes were on Elena. When Sophia had gone to her room to put on her shoes, he placed the envelope on the table. "This is happening, Elena. I've already spoken to a lawyer. It's all there. The terms, the custody plan, the financials." Elena picked it up with shaking hands. "You're divorcing me." James looked almost relieved. "You knew this was coming. Let's not pretend." She stared at the paperwork, then at the man she had once built a life with, the man she had once prayed for. "You're not even gonna try?" He shrugged. "Try for what?" "We're done. We've been done. You just didn't want to admit it." Her voice cracked, raw with disbelief. "After everything I gave up, after all the nights I stayed, all the things I forgave, this is how you end it?" He leaned close, lowering his voice just as Sophia skipped into the hallway. "You were never enough, Elena. Not for me." She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply nodded. And when the door closed behind him, when his car pulled away for good, Elena stood in the quiet kitchen with the divorce papers pressed against her chest. The kettle whistled. The rain returned. And for the first time in years, she sat at the kitchen table, alone, but not broken. She knew now, this wasn't the end. This was the beginning. Shall I continue with Chapter 3, Eviction Notice, Broken Heart? 2 weeks passed like fog, heavy, blinding, silent. Elena moved through each day on autopilot. Wake Sophia, feed her, walk her to school, return home, work night shift, sleep in fragments, repeat. But beneath the routine, the slow-burning ache of betrayal pulsed through every breath. She hadn't told Sophia the full truth, only that Daddy was staying somewhere else and Mommy needs to be strong for both of us. At 6 years old, Sophia just nodded and asked if Daddy would still come for her birthday. Elena smiled and lied for the both of them. Then, one quiet Thursday afternoon, while folding Sophia's small dresses into neat piles, the doorbell rang. It was Mira Hart. Mira didn't smile. She didn't even flinch. She wore sharp heels and a tight black dress, the kind of outfit no real estate agent needed unless she was trying to look expensive. She held a thick envelope in her manicured hands. "Elena?" she said coolly. "This isn't personal. James transferred the deed to me. The house is legally mine now." Elena blinked. "You're evicting me?" Mira shrugged. "You have 14 days, unless you want to fight it, but I wouldn't recommend that. James made sure the paperwork was clean." The wind outside felt like it pierced through the walls. Elena's voice trembled, but she didn't allow it to break. "There's a child here. His child." Mira looked past her, into the house. "This house is just bricks and air now, Elena. It's not your home anymore." When Mira left, Elena didn't shut the door right away. She stood there, the wind pushing against her face, her feet planted like roots to a life she no longer owned. A few neighbors peeked from their windows, curious but not brave enough to speak. Shame bloomed inside her like a bruise. That night, she didn't eat. She stared at the wall, clutching the deed transfer papers until her knuckles turned white. She didn't cry, not yet. But the pain was different now. It wasn't sharp, it was cold, hollow. She spent the next few days searching for rentals. Everything in their area was too expensive or too small. But then she remembered the old flower shop her grandmother used to own, tucked between a butcher and a laundromat in a forgotten corner of Birmingham. It had been closed for years, but the upstairs still had rooms. She drove there one morning with Sophia asleep in the back seat. The moment she stepped inside, the smell of dried petals and dust filled her lungs. It wasn't much. The ceiling leaked and the floor creaked like tired bones, but it was hers, if she could make it so. The landlord agreed to a month-to-month deal. No deposit, just a handshake and a warning. "You'll have to fix the place yourself, love. No one's touched it since your nan died." Elena accepted the keys. On the 13th day, she packed her entire life into boxes, what was left of it, and carried them out in silence. James didn't show up. Mira didn't either. Sophia clung to a stuffed rabbit and asked if they were going on vacation. Elena whispered, "Something like that, baby." She drove away without looking back. That night, in the small upstairs room above the flower shop, Elena and Sophia slept on a mattress on the floor. Rain tapped gently on the cracked windows. The city outside buzzed quietly, unaware of the woman who had been discarded like trash. But she wasn't trash. She was soil, and something was about to grow from her. Something beautiful, something unbreakable. Would you like to continue with Chapter 4, From Soil and Tears She Grows? Elena woke up to the sharp cry of a pigeon on the windowsill and the steady breathing of Sophia curled up beside her, still clutching her stuffed rabbit. Sunlight filtered through the dusty glass panes, casting lines of light across the worn wooden floor. Her body ached from sleeping on a mattress too thin, in a room too cold, but something inside her felt awake. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like drowning. Downstairs, the flower shop still smelled of time. Shelves coated in dust, cobwebs between the cracked pots, and dead vines that hung like the remnants of better years. But the bones were there, the bones of a place that once held life. Her grandmother's shop had once been the heartbeat of this neighborhood. Elena remembered watering plants as a teenager here, her fingers always smelling of earth and jasmine. She rolled up her sleeves. Each morning, after walking Sophia to school, Elena returned to the shop. She scrubbed the floors, painted the walls, pulled weeds from the front display. Her hands bled, her back ached, but she never stopped. With each nail hammered in, she felt closer to herself again, closer to the woman she had buried under years of sacrifice. At night, she collapsed on the mattress, exhausted but content. Sophia helped, painting tiny signs with messy letters, "Mummy's Flower Shop," "Hope Grows Here," and taping them on the windows. They laughed over burnt pasta and made up stories about the flowers that would one day bloom. Still, grief came in quiet moments. In the middle of the night, when Sophia was asleep and the silence pressed too close, Elena would sometimes scroll through James's social media. He looked happy, smiling in restaurants, arm around Mira, dressed in expensive suits she never could have afforded for him. He had become the man she had believed he could be, but for someone else. She would set the phone down and sit by the window, staring into the darkness, trying not to cry. Not because she still wanted him, but because she had given everything to help him grow, and he had bloomed in someone else's garden. One day, Harold Lewis knocked on her shop door. He was the boy next door she used to ride bikes with. Now a man with a sharp jaw and kind eyes, dressed in a lawyer's coat but smiling like no time had passed. He had heard through the neighborhood about what James did, how Elena was forced out, how she was starting over. "You don't have to do this alone," he said simply, standing amidst unopened seed packets and empty flower pots. Elena, hesitant at first, allowed him in. He rolled up his sleeves, helped with the plumbing, brought secondhand shelves and fairy lights, gave legal advice. But more than anything, he gave silence when silence was what she needed, and laughter when she'd forgotten how. One afternoon, a woman wandered into the shop. She looked around and said, "I don't know why, but I feel like I was meant to walk in here." Elena smiled. "That's how healing starts. You don't know why, but your feet bring you where your heart needs to be." The woman bought 3 sunflowers and came back the next day with a friend. Word spread. Within a month, Elena's shop was open for real. Small bouquets at first, then weddings, funerals, baby showers. People said the flowers from Elena's garden felt different, more alive, more sincere, like they had been grown with pain and watered with hope. Elena stood behind the counter one evening, hands stained with soil, apron streaked with petals, and watched Sophia chase bubbles in the streetlight outside the shop. Her daughter's laughter filled the air. This wasn't the life she had planned, but it was finally hers. And in the quiet of the shop, surrounded by bloom and breath, Elena whispered to herself, "I didn't need him to become who I am." Shall we continue with Chapter 5, Mira's Rise, James's Fall? She had been walking home from the market, arms full of lilies and baby's breath, when her eyes caught the giant ad above the roundabout. Mira Hart Real Estate. Luxury is a lifestyle. There she was, perfectly lit, smiling wide in a tailored blazer, one manicured hand resting on James's chest. He looked like a man reborn, sharper, richer, untouchable. Elena stood beneath the billboard for a long time. People moved past her. Cars honked, but the world blurred. The woman who once stood in her kitchen, handing her an eviction letter, now stood 10 feet tall, advertising a life Elena was never given the chance to live. Back at the shop, she clipped stems harder than usual that day. Her hands trembled, not with jealousy, but with something older, a mix of betrayal and disbelief that no apology ever came. No ounce of remorse, not even a text saying, "I hope Sophia's okay." Her daughter hadn't seen James in nearly 3 weeks. But what James didn't realize, what Mira hadn't even suspected, was that Elena had begun to fight back, quietly, strategically, like a woman who had been underestimated one too many times. Months earlier, when James first pushed for Elena to sign joint documents on a new investment, she had insisted on keeping copies. He had laughed at her back then, told her she was paranoid. But the numbers in those documents didn't lie. Hidden accounts, misappropriated funds. Elena hadn't been sure what to do with them until Harold came back into her life. He took one look and said, "You know what this is, don't you? He's not just dishonest, he's criminal." They didn't rush. They gathered quietly, waited patiently. Harold advised her, "Don't seek revenge. Seek truth. Truth lasts longer." Meanwhile, Mira and James's empire grew like a balloon with too much air. They launched a luxury condo project in central London, lavish launch parties, champagne with influencers, magazine features that called them the golden couple of modern real estate. But behind closed doors, James was slipping. He began taking riskier loans. Mira, blinded by ambition, co-signed everything. Elena heard whispers from former mutual friends. James showing up drunk to meetings, Mira yelling at staff, suppliers left unpaid. Still, the social media facade was spotless, until it cracked. The investigation began quietly, triggered by Harold's report and the financial records Elena had saved. Then came the audit, then the subpoenas. It happened faster than anyone expected. One day, Elena was preparing an arrangement for a grieving widow when the news flashed on the small radio behind the counter. Real estate firm Hart & Grant under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. CEO James Grant named in court documents. Elena didn't smile. She didn't rejoice. But she did sit down, right there on the floor between buckets of peonies, and let herself breathe. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for karma. She was watching it arrive. 3 days later, a black car pulled up in front of her shop. She didn't flinch. She didn't hide. James stepped out, no tie, beard growing, eyes hollow. He opened the door slowly, the bell chiming like an echo from another life. Elena stood behind the counter, calm, composed, her fingers still wrapped around floral scissors. "You reported me," he said. She tilted her head. "You think I'm the reason you're drowning?" "No, James, you handed yourself the anchor." He looked around the shop at the life she had built from the ashes he left. "I didn't think you'd land on your feet." "You didn't think I'd stand at all," she said. He laughed once, bitter and small. "Mira's gone. Took what she could and ran. She said I ruined everything." Elena met his eyes. "You did." James didn't ask to see Sophia. He didn't apologize. He just stood there, a man undone by his own hunger, then turned and walked out. When the door closed, Elena exhaled, not with relief, not with joy, but with power. Because James may have taken her house, her marriage, even her trust, but he had given her one thing back, herself. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 6, Sophia's Tears? The day Sophia stopped asking about her father was the day Elena realized how deep the wound had gone. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon. The shop had closed early after a small wedding delivery, and Elena had picked Sophia up from school under the golden canopy of autumn trees. They stopped for ice cream like they used to and walked hand in hand down the narrow alley behind the shop. Sophia's grip was tight but cold. Not from weather, from something else. Inside their small flat upstairs, Sophia curled on the rug, coloring in silence. Elena unpacked the groceries, glancing over every few minutes, waiting. Normally, Sophia would fill the room with chatter, schoolyard drama, drawings, imaginary games with her rabbit doll. But that day, she said nothing. Her silence had its own weight. Elena crouched beside her. "Sweetheart, is something wrong?" Sophia didn't look up. "It's nothing." Elena's throat tightened. "You can tell me anything, Sayang." Sophia paused, crayon trembling slightly in her hand. At school, kids said their daddies helped them with homework. Emma said her daddy took her to the park on Sunday. Elena waited, and then she asked me where mine was. Sophia finally looked up, her eyes too big, too wise. I didn't know what to say. I just said you were enough. But then she laughed. A crack formed deep in Elena's chest. She reached for her daughter, pulled her into her lap, held her close. "You're never alone, baby. I'm here. Always." Sophia's voice broke. "Did I do something wrong? Is that why Daddy left?" Elena shut her eyes. There it was, the unbearable question, the one that carved straight through bone and heart. She hugged Sophia tighter, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "No, my love. No, Daddy leaving had nothing to do with you. He made choices, selfish ones. But you did nothing wrong. Do you hear me?" Sophia nodded, but a tear slipped down her cheek anyway. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her hands. Hands that had held too much, given too much. There was no guidebook for this. No right way to mend a child's broken innocence. All she could do was show up. Every day. Every moment. She called Harold the next morning. "I want full custody," she said. He didn't ask why. He just said, "It's time." They filed the papers within the week. James didn't contest. He didn't even show up to court. Elena walked out of the courtroom with Sophia's birth certificate newly stamped, custody officially hers. And yet, her heart felt heavy, because justice didn't erase damage. It didn't fill the chair at Sophia's school recital. It didn't undo the silent questions hiding behind her daughter's eyes. But it was a beginning. Later that month, Sophia's teacher asked Elena if she would speak at Career Day. "She talks about you all the time," she said with a smile. "She says her mom makes flowers that help people heal." Elena did go. She brought lilies and roses, peonies and sunflowers. She talked about resilience, about roots, about how even in broken soil, things can bloom. Sophia sat in the front row, eyes shining. And when the talk ended, she ran up and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Mommy." Alina knelt, took her daughter's face in her hands, and whispered back, "And I'm proud of you. You're the bravest girl I know." Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, something had shifted, not the pain, not the loss, but the shape of their future. Two petals side by side, mother and daughter, still healing, still growing. Shall we continue with Chapter 7, The Trial of a Name? The courtroom was colder than Alina expected. The air didn't move. The walls echoed with whispers and the distant sound of heels against polished tile. She sat on the front bench, hands clasped in her lap, as the prosecution laid out the charges. Wire fraud, money laundering, falsifying documents. Each word felt like an old bruise being pressed. James sat on the defense side, thinner than before, his once sharp suit now wrinkled at the collar. Mira was nowhere to be seen. Rumors said she had fled to Spain under another name. But James stayed, not out of bravery, but because the evidence was too loud to outrun. Harold had advised her carefully. "They'll call you up. They may try to shake you, but you have the truth, Alina, and the truth can't be flinched from." When the judge called her name, Alina Grace Grant, it landed like a weight in the room. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and walked to the witness stand. The bailiff held out a Bible. She placed her hand over it, her other hand trembling slightly. "I do," she said. The questioning began gently. How long had she been married? What was her role in their finances? When did she first suspect foul play? She answered clearly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her spine. But then James's lawyer stood, a man with perfect diction and sharp eyes. "Mrs. Grant," he said, "you've recently opened a business, haven't you?" "I have," she answered. "Has your business benefited from Mr. Grant's downfall? More attention, perhaps?" "I built that business from nothing, from ash." He smiled faintly. "But you did report him, correct?" She hesitated. "I gave evidence, truthful evidence." "So, in a way, you wanted this outcome?" Alina looked out across the room, at the jury, at the judge, at the man who once shared her bed. "No," she said firmly. "I didn't want him to fall. I wanted him to be decent. I wanted him to be a father, a partner. I wanted him to change. But when he didn't, I stopped protecting him. That's not revenge. That's survival." There was silence. Not cold silence, listening silence. She was dismissed. Back on her seat, Alina let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. James looked at her just once as she passed him. Not with hate, not even with anger, but with something emptier, defeat. The trial lasted 3 more days. The verdict came on a quiet Friday afternoon. James Grant? Guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison, with no parole for at least 5. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just lowered his head and accepted the cuffs. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded for statements. Alina didn't speak to them. But when asked by one young journalist, "Do you feel justice has been served?" she paused, then said, "Justice isn't a verdict. It's waking up every morning knowing you chose peace over bitterness, truth over silence. I didn't want to destroy him. I just wanted to stop being destroyed." She walked away, her heels clicking on wet pavement. Back at the shop, Sophia ran into her arms like the world hadn't cracked just days before. "Can we get pizza tonight?" she asked, full of joy. Alina laughed. "Extra cheese?" "Extra cheese and no mushrooms." They danced around the kitchen, music playing, flour flying, the trial already becoming a memory wrapped in justice. That night, after Sophia had gone to bed, Alina sat by the window with a cup of tea. Rain streaked the glass. Her name had been spoken in a courtroom, written in documents, whispered by strangers. But it didn't belong to James anymore. Her name, Alina Grace Grant, was hers again, and it no longer carried shame, it carried survival. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 8, The Woman He Left Behind? The prison sentence didn't bring James back into Alina's mind. It pushed him out for good. He became what he had turned her into years ago, a shadow in someone else's story. The world moved on. The headlines faded. Mira's name disappeared from every billboard. James's name remained only in court records and whispers. And Alina, once evicted, once erased, continued to rise. Alina's garden blossomed into something more than a flower shop. It became a space for women who had been silenced, stepped over, or dismissed. She hosted workshops on healing, created small reading corners filled with stories of resilience, set up a donation wall for single mothers needing groceries, diapers, and dignity. It was no longer just business, it was redemption blooming from broken roots. People came not just for bouquets, but for what Elena represented. One rainy afternoon, months after the trial, she received an unexpected letter. The return address, HMP Oak Ridge Prison. She opened it slowly, careful not to tear the paper. Open quote, Elena, I don't expect forgiveness, I know I deserve it, but I wanted you to know something. Mira left me. My parents won't speak to me, and every time I close my eyes, I remember the day I watched you walk away from that courtroom without looking back. That image haunts me, because you looked whole. You were always better than me. I see that now. Tell Sophia I'm sorry for not being the kind of father she deserved, for choosing ego over love, for everything. James, close quote. Elena read it once, then again. Her hands didn't shake, her eyes didn't well up. She folded the letter, placed it in a box of old receipts and court documents, and locked it away. Not out of bitterness, but because that chapter was finished. Closure doesn't always look like answers, it often looks like silence. That weekend, she took Sophia to the seaside. They walked barefoot along the wet sand, the wind in their hair. Sophia pointed at seagulls, made castles with cold fingers, and wrote their names in the sand. Sophia and Mummy. No daddy, no longing, just two names, side by side, glowing under the fading sun. As they sat watching the tide pull their footprints back into the sea, Sophia leaned her head on Elena's shoulder and whispered, I'm glad it's just us. Elena smiled, brushing her daughter's hair from her eyes. Me too, love. Back at the shop, a reporter left a voicemail, requesting an interview for a piece called The Woman He Left Behind. Elena never returned the call. She didn't want to be remembered as the one left. She wanted to be remembered as the one who stayed standing. In the mirror, she saw a woman with soft lines around her eyes, soil under her nails, and strength braided into her spine. She didn't need apologies or recognition or revenge. She had a daughter who loved her. A shop that healed others, and a name that no longer belonged to a man in a courtroom. It belonged to her. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 9, Blooming Where He Buried Her? Spring came earlier than expected that year. The streets of Birmingham were washed in soft light, daffodils poking through cracks in the pavement like quiet rebellions. At Elena's garden, the windows fogged with warmth from within, and the air carried the scent of lavender, mint, and resilience. Elena stood by the front counter, tying a ribbon around a bouquet for a young bride. A regular customer who had once cried in this very shop after being left at the altar. Now she was smiling, radiant, filled with hope. You helped me get through the hardest year of my life, she said to Elena. I don't know how, but your flowers felt like little pieces of courage. Elena didn't reply with grandeur. Just a soft, you had the strength in you all along. I just reminded you. That was what the shop had become, a sanctuary. But no one knew the full story. No one knew how this space was born from a woman once abandoned with a child, once called not enough, once buried beneath the weight of someone else's failure. But James had buried the wrong woman, because where he expected ruin, Elena built roots. Where he planted shame, she grew purpose. One afternoon, as she repotted hydrangeas in the front garden bed, a stranger stepped into the shop, mid-30s, quiet eyes, worn coat. He introduced himself as a city council representative. We've heard about the work you've been doing here, he said, looking around the blooming shelves, the community board filled with thank you notes and names of women in need. We'd like to offer funding, he continued, to turn this into a full-scale community resource, a women's wellness center maybe? With therapy, childcare, training? Elena blinked, caught off guard. She had never sought recognition, never lobbied for attention. But here it was, a door being opened by the very city that once turned a blind eye when she was cast out. I don't want to be anyone's charity, she said gently. The man smiled. You're not. You're the example. She thought of Sophia, of Harold, still quietly supportive in the background, of every woman who walked in with pain and left with something blooming in her chest. Elena said yes. In the weeks that followed, Elena's garden expanded. The back room was transformed into a children's reading nook. The upstairs became a space for legal aid and counseling. Volunteers arrived. Donations poured in. The shop was no longer just hers. It belonged to every woman who had ever been erased and decided to rewrite her story. Sophia painted a mural on the side of the shop wall, a field of wildflowers rising from cracks in stone. In the center, a girl holding a watering can shaped like a heart. No name, no face, just a symbol. People came from across the city to see it, to take photos, to ask who had made it all happen. Elena always smiled, but never boasted. She didn't need to say it. She had bloomed where he buried her. And every petal, every leaf, every woman who walked through her door was proof. He lost the moment he thought he could ruin her. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 10? Justice is her middle name? The day the memoir was released, it rained softly. Not the kind of rain that ruins things, but the kind that makes the world quieter, more reflective, like it was listening. The book sat in the center display at the shop, wrapped in cream and gold with pressed wildflowers tucked into the ribbon. Its title was simple, Wilted, Then Wild. The dedication on the first page read, For Sophia, who taught me that even when love is taken, it can be rebuilt, stronger, brighter, rooted in truth. Elena didn't plan for it to become a bestseller. She hadn't written for fame. She wrote because the words had nowhere else to go, because the silence she endured for years demanded a voice, and because somewhere she knew another woman was staring at a lipstick-stained collar, wondering if it was her fault. Now those women were writing letters, visiting the shop, crying in the aisles. Some left flowers, others left stories. One email from a stranger read, Your story saved me. I almost believed him when he said I was nothing, but then I read your words, and now I know better. Justice didn't come in a courtroom alone. It came in healing, in names reclaimed, in wounds aired under sunlight. Sophia sat beside Elena during her first book signing, twirling a sunflower pen and whispering, They're all here for you, Mommy. Elena looked up, a line of people wrapped around the block, some holding books, others holding pain, some just needing to see what survival looked like. A journalist from a national newspaper asked for an interview. What does justice mean to you now, Mrs. Grant? Elena smiled, soft but certain. It's not just about the man who wronged me being behind bars, she said. It's about me walking free, even when the world tried to keep me small. It's waking up in my own skin, in my own name, and not flinching anymore. It's my daughter growing up, never doubting her worth. She paused, then added, Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet woman running a flower shop and giving life to what once tried to kill her. As applause filled the bookstore, James sat in a prison library, flipping through the pages of Wilted, Then Wild. No one spoke to him. No one sat near him. He closed the book halfway and stared into nothing for a long time. Because every word, every line, every page was a mirror, and in it he saw what he gave up. Elena never visited, never wrote back, but her story had. Months later, Elena stood in the middle of a garden she had designed for women starting over, named the Grace Center, after her own middle name. A reporter asked why she chose that title. She looked around at the tulips, the playground, the rows of lavender. Because it reminds me, she said, that grace is not weakness. It's survival. It's power with gentleness. It's justice with mercy. Sophia ran toward her, arms outstretched, laughter echoing across the garden. Elena bent down, lifted her up, and spun her under the open sky. The woman James left was long gone. What remained was a woman he could never touch again. Justice, after all, was her middle name. And now, the world knew it too.